Before this story ends, you'll ask yourself one question. What if I was next? Welcome to Nightline Stories. If you're not afraid of the dark, stay. Turn off the lights. Lock your doors. This is the story called Traceless. The rain drummed through the glass of the detective room, creating a hypnotic rhythm combined with the quiet rustling of old papers on the table. David Parker sat hunched over, and his gaze fussily ran through the lists of recent disappearances, which he tried to systematize in a notebook. The city was drowning in darkness and silence from the outside. The streets were almost empty, except that the dim light of the lanterns was reflected on the wet cobblestones. The cars moved slowly, scattering puddles of light, and the air smelled of rain and dampness. But the worst thing is that people disappeared without a trace. No screams, no struggles, no dust. As if they never existed. David leaned towards the notebook, carefully turning the pages. His fingers touched the photos of the missing, and every face seemed to look at him with a silent reproach. Another victim was an old man who lived alone on the outskirts of the city. No one has seen or heard him for the last few hours. Only the door remained locked, and his world seemed to just evaporate. The fourth person in a week, David whispered, his voice quiet, almost for himself. What is this curse that hides people, as if they didn't exist? He raised his head and looked at his reflection in the puddle on the floor of the office. Fatigue, anxiety, and despair mixed in his eyes. He could feel his heart tighten with helplessness. Each disappearance left behind not only emptiness, but also the feeling that the city was slowly turning into a trap, where even memories could disappear. His partner, Mark Reynolds, suddenly appeared in the doorway with a heavy expression. There was a cold pita drop on his forehead, despite the coolness of the room. "David, there is another disappearance," he said, his voice trembling with tension. "And this time, we have a clue." David felt a cold tremor running down his back and to his hands. His fingers clenched into fists inadvertently. He packed up, took his coat, and together with Mark, they quickly left the office. The rain hit the roof of the service car, creating puddles in which the headlights danced like a reflection of another gloomy world. "Are you sure this isn't another false alarm?" David asked, trying to remain calm, but his voice betrayed excitement. "No," Mark replied, looking intently at the street. The witnesses saw the man just disappear. Without shouting, without fighting, just dissolved into thin air. David leaned over the puddles and wet asphalt. His gaze focused on small details, broken branches, traces of shoes, small stains of dirt. And then he saw this. Strange traces on the earth. Footprints disappeared, gradually dissolving in the fog of the night, as if they had never happened. His heart tightened. He felt a cold fear slowly enveloping his body. "It's impossible," David said, leaning closer. "How is this possible?" Mark bent down to examine the tracks. His face turned white with surprise. "Witnesses say they saw him literally disappearing. It doesn't look like anything earthly," he said quietly. David took his gaze off the ground as his gaze fell on a small object lying among the puddles. He bent down and picked up an old clock. The dial did not have arrows, but its surface was covered with strange, almost handwritten symbols that seemed alien, and at the same time familiar. "Did this belong to the missing person?" David whispered, carefully holding the watch in his hands. "And it seems to have something to do with all these disappearances." Mark nodded and quickly took out the phone. "Let's send it for examination. Maybe they're deciphering something." David was left alone, returning to the office after a short break. He flipped through the notebook again, trying to find at least some logical connection between the missing But the more he looked at their faces, the deeper he plunged into the feeling of hopelessness. What if he becomes next? What if this watch is just the beginning of something much bigger and scary? He sighed and put his head on his hands. The rain outside the window continued to drum, rhythmically and hypnotically, as if reminding, nothing lasts forever, and that disappearance is only a matter of time. David could feel the cold seeping through to his bones as he looked at the symbols on his watch. The lines engraved on the metal looked as if they were moving, as if the symbols themselves were breathing in the dark. He leaned closer, trying to make out every sign. One of them seemed to be a portal, a passage into the unknown, a place where time and space could disappear. The heart beats more often when thoughts spin in the head. What if it is not just an ancient artifact, but the key to what absorbs people? David felt that the city around him had become different. Every street seemed darker. Every sound was louder. The sound of rain turned into a rhythmic echo of footsteps that were not there. His brain tried to find logic, but everything was absurd. Children disappeared on the playgrounds, the elderly disappeared in the middle of the street, and the apartments remained locked from the inside, as if time had stopped and space had absorbed the living. He looked through his notebook. The map of disappearances took shape. The points on the map are not connected by chance. The lines that connected them formed strange geometric shapes, similar to the symbols on the clock. David reread the notes again and again, trying to make a logical chain. Each disappearance was as part of a great mystery that he could not yet see completely. That evening, David dedicated the clock. He placed it on the table under the light of a lamp, and the shadows of the symbols danced on the walls. The detective's hunting instinct defended him from fear, but his heart beat faster than he wanted. It seemed to him that every movement of the shadow on the wall was being watched by someone. He turned around a few times, but the room was empty. Suddenly the phone rang again. David picked up the phone, holding it tightly so that his hands would not twitch. "David, you have to see this," Mark said, and his voice seemed dull, filled with fear. "We got a photo from a witness. You won't believe it." At the other end of the line, David heard the sound of the wind and a dull voice. "It's a park. The little girl who disappeared yesterday. Her photo. Look carefully." David leaned over the phone screen. In the photo, there was an empty space where the girl was supposed to stand. Only a light, which looked like a scattered white fog spot, spilled over on the grass. He felt a chill running through his back. "It's not just a disappearance," he muttered. "It's something else." Mark continued. "The same with the elderly man leaving the store. His disappearance was recorded on surveillance cameras. The camera shows his last step, and then the void. No one. No sound. No trace." David clenched his teeth. Something in all this does not lend itself to any logic. He felt that the clock was not just an object, but a beacon that leads to something beyond his understanding. He began to draw diagrams, combining disappearances with lines, symbols, and arrows. Each new point on the map created the feeling of a dark maze where he himself could find himself at any moment. His thoughts revolved around one dark idea. Maybe these people are not disappearing, but moving to some other world. The city has become a trap where even memory can disappear, and the clock is the key to the clue. David could feel the tension rising. He wanted to scream, but his voice was stuck in his throat. He sat as if paralyzed, looking at the symbols on the clock, at the photos of empty places, and at the map that grew like the lace of darkness. His hands nervously squeezed the pen, and his heart beat faster and faster, as if warning, Time was approaching, and he himself could soon find himself on the verge of what the mind could not explain. He took a deep breath, smelling the rain and dampness through the open window, and thought, I have to understand this before it's too late. If I don't find the key, I may be next. Silence filled the office, and the clock quietly reflected its own unknown rhythm. David felt the darkness outside and inside begin to intertwine closely, enveloping him in a mystical, anxious premonition that everything that was happening was just the beginning of something much more terrible. The next morning, David Parker woke up with a feeling of heaviness in his chest. The rain finally subsided, but the city remained cloudy and damp, as if the air itself kept traces of nightmares. He packed up and went to meet Mark, feeling that this time they would finally be able to find something real in the midst of chaos. I feel like we missed something important, David said as they got into the car. This clock, these symbols, they are not just an ornament. It's like a map. Mark nodded, looking carefully at the map with the missing marks. The lines that connected the points resembled geometric shapes that should not exist in the real world. I noticed a pattern, he said quietly. Some points form a circle. And a circle always means completion, and at the same time, a portal. Their first stop was in the park, where a little girl disappeared. The locals were still whispering about the strange light that absorbed the child. Approaching that place, David noticed faint prints on the grass, as if someone's presence had left a slight mark in the air. It can't be real, he whispered. Someone left a trace, and then it just dissolved. Mark raised a small compass and measured the direction. All these traces lead to an old warehouse on the outskirts, he said, a place that has long been abandoned. No one has been there for years. David felt his heart tighten. Intuition told him that they were approaching the center of the mystery. The warehouse was dark and empty. The door creaked and opened, and they went inside. Dust and old boxes created bizarre shadows on the walls, moving as if alive. There's something here, David whispered, his voice trembling. I can feel the energy. And then they saw the first real traces. On the floor, among the dust, there were prints that glowed with a faint blue light. They did not belong to any person or animal. Every step left here, as if alive, pulsated in the dark. Someone, or something was going on here, Mark whispered, and I'm sure it hasn't gone yet. David could feel a shiver covering his body. One question was spinning in my head. What kind of force can leave traces, and then erase them, leaving behind a void? They moved on. The composition seemed endless. Each room was like a trap, where the usual logic did not work. The racks with boxes formed a maze, and the air became thick as a liquid shadow. David, Mark said quietly, there's something alive here. I feel a presence. And then, in the middle of the darkness, they noticed movement. The shadow that slowly slid across the walls was almost imperceptible. David sat down, holding his breath. The shadow stopped, as if waiting for them to take a step forward. It's him, David whispered. The one who erases the marks. Their hearts were beating fast. They knew that any step could be the last. Watching, they noticed another strange mark on the floor. The blue light was pulsating, and the shape of the print was almost human, but crooked, like a distorted shadow. We need to move carefully, Mark said. If it's him, we have no idea what he's capable of. David nodded, feeling the cold penetrating the bones. They moved on, quietly, step by step, carefully watching every movement of light and shadow. Every second seemed like an eternity. The city was left behind, and the warehouse became a corridor between reality and something unknown, dark, living beyond human perception. David felt his mind gradually capture fear and curiosity at the same time. He knew that to understand this horror, you would need to dive deeper than ever. Sometimes it seemed to him that the clock on the table itself was leading them, like a beacon in the dark, urging them to go further. "We must know the truth," he whispered. "Otherwise, any of us can be next." The warehouse seemed like an endless labyrinth of darkness. Every step David and Mark echoed on the walls, reflecting off empty boxes and old shelves. The air was thick, like smoke, and smelled of dust, dampness, and something else. Something incomprehensible. Creepy. "David," Mark said softly, "it seems that we are not alone." David nodded, holding his breath. His eyes tried to catch any movement, any change in the darkness. And then they noticed it. The shadow that slid down the walls. She moved silently, smoothly, and it seemed that she did not touch the ground. David's heart tightened with fear. "It's him. The one who erases the tracks," David whispered, feeling the cold running through his entire body. The creature slowly approached. Initially, David and Mark could have taken her for human, but the creature's face was distorted beyond recognition. The eyes shone with a strange light, and the long, bony hands stretched forward, as if trying to absorb all living things. Each of her movements created a slight trembling of the air, and the shadows around her seemed to come to life and danced with her. "She... or he..." Mark couldn't finish the sentence. David felt his heart want to jump out of his chest. He knew that any careless movement could be the last. The warehouse seemed to live, reacting to their presence. The boxes swayed, the old boards cracked, and the light from the weak lamps began to flicker, creating strange shadows that repeated the creature's movements. "Hold on to your watch," David whispered. "I feel like he... or she's trying to lure us." The creature stopped a few meters away from them. Her hands slid through the air, and at this moment, the floor in front of them began to glow blue light. The fingerprints that appeared seemed to show the route to be taken. David realized, the creature uses this world as a trap, leaving clues, and at the same time erasing traces. "It's impossible," Mark whispered, taking a step back. "She erases everything she touches. We can't even leave a trace." David raised his watch and studied the symbols. One of the engraved markings began to glow in a dim blue light, as if responding to the creature's presence. David's heart tightened. It was a sign that opened the portal into the unknown. "We have to move forward," he said quietly. "If we stop, she will swallow us up." The creature slowly stretched out his hands, and at the same moment, the shadows in the room thickened, as if alive. Each box and wall became part of the labyrinth it created around them. David and Mark walked carefully, step by step, avoiding light trails that could attract the creature's attention. Suddenly, David felt the space around him thicken. He saw in front of him the people who had disappeared earlier. Their empty faces looked at him. They did not move, did not breathe, but their presence pressed on consciousness like a heavy fog. "They're all here," he whispered, feeling the cold run down his back. "And now we're in line." Mark squeezed his hand nervously. "Hold on. We'll find a way out. We have to understand what he or she wants." The creature took a step forward. Her movements became faster, as if she felt the fear of David and Mark. The air was filled with the smell of dampness and something unrecognizable, creepy. Shadows swirled around them, forming a spiral that pulled inward. David felt the clock in his hands pulsate, giving off a faint warmth. The symbols on it began to glow brighter, as if reacting to the presence of the creature. He knew it wasn't just a thing. It is a key that can open the way out, or absorb them permanently. They took one more step forward, and at that moment the creature stopped, as if thinking about the next move. The silence was oppressive, heavy, and every sound seemed deafening. David looked at the blue light of the prince and felt that they were on the edge of reality, where any mistake costs life. "Remember," he whispered to Mark, "we can't back down. If now, in this second, we stop." The creature took the next step. Shadows slowly began to envelop David and Mark, and the space in front of them became like liquid dark air pulling inside. David squeezed his watch and felt his consciousness fill with cold, fear, and creepy curiosity at the same time. He knew that in order to survive, they would have to go even deeper, into the maze, where reality and the nightmare merged together, and where their traces may be the last. David squeezed the old watch, feeling its heat being contrasted with the cold air of the warehouse. The symbols on the dial glowed brightly, as if indicating the way. Before them, a spiral of blue light opened, a portal to something unknown, something that went beyond any logic or physics. "This is it," David whispered. "There are those who disappeared, and if we don't go through it, we'll never know the truth." Mark looked at him and nodded. "I'm with you, but be careful. I feel like it's not just another world. It's a trap for those who are still alive." They stepped forward. The light covered their legs, raised them above the ground, and pulled them inside. The space around began to change. The walls of the warehouse disappeared, replaced by a dark abyss, broken only by the faint flicker of strange lights hanging in the air, like tiny stars. David saw the faces of those who had disappeared before. They stood motionless, empty inside, without emotions and memories. Their eyes looked directly at him, as if they knew something he couldn't comprehend. My heart tightened with regret and fear. "They're here? But why?" he whispered, feeling the chill run down his back. Suddenly, a creature appeared before them, the same one that erased the traces. Her face was even more distorted, and her body seemed as liquid as a shadow. She didn't move fast, but her every look was like a blade cutting through space and time. "You've gone too far," she said in a silent voice, right in David and Mark's head. "And now, there's no choice." Mark took a step back, but David stopped him. "We need to know what it is," he said firmly. "If not now, never." The creature raised its hands, and the space around them began to spin. The sense of gravity disappeared, and the shadows around took on the outlines of living forms. They were as if from a world where time and reality did not matter. Every step of David and Mark left a trace in the air that instantly disappeared, eaten by the darkness. David raised the watch and touched the glowing symbol. Suddenly, the portal began to react. The light played brighter shades. The shadows receded, as if the creature felt the power that the clock held in its hands. "I feel," David whispered, "like you can survive if you use it right." The creature took a step forward, but with its movement, something changed. The symbols on the clock shone brightly and dispelled the darkness around. There was a corridor of light through which David and Mark could pass. It was the last test, to pass through the light without looking back and not allowing fear to control thoughts. "Together," exclaimed David. They rushed forward. The darkness tried to pull them back, creating illusions and fears that come to life right before their eyes. A girl from the park, an elderly man, a woman from the album. They all appeared, but remained only shadows. David squeezed the clock, and the symbols pointed the right way. And finally they broke through the portal. The light blinded them for a moment, and when their eyes got used to it, a city spread out in front of them, familiar but calm. The rain stopped. The silence was not terrible, but peaceful. The people who had disappeared before stood nearby, turning their faces and memories. They slowly dissolved in the world, returning to life. David lowered his watch. He felt tired, afraid, and incredibly relieved at the same time. Mark glanced at him and smiled. "We did it," he whispered. "We survived." But David knew. The creature that erases the traces did not disappear completely. Somewhere in the dark, another test awaits, and the symbols on the clock are just the beginning. They return to the city, to life. But now every step reminded. The line between reality and nightmare is always thin. And everyone who disappeared left behind a void that can only be filled by the courage of those who are ready to seek the truth. David squeezed the watch in his hands. He knew that this was not the end, but a new beginning. And now he was ready for everything that awaits outside the visible world. If you're still here, then the story let you go. Subscribe and like, so the darkness knows you're watching. See you in the next story.